I'm going to pretend we're live. So I guess we're live. And welcome to another kitchen sink live croscopy. I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and we would absolutely love it if you'd like and share this video, subscribe to the channel, all that jazz, hit that bell if you want notifications. I don't know. Subscriptions don't matter anymore. Dislikes don't matter anymore. Nobody cares. But hey, watch the channel. You'll love it. It's going to be a good one.
WWIII, Druzias. I am Casey Rochford, and we would love it if you would hang around to the end. Oh, wait, we won't have a song because we're live. So, what would you like to talk about on this fine, chilly evening, Eric?
Well, why don't we talk about war?
Yeah.
Specifically, Ukraine versus Russia, all that stuff. I mean, there's some other players going on, some other things happening, but that would be. Oh, and for all those nitpickers out there, yes, I understand. I have an AK and I have a US Kevlar helmet at the same time. It's a mismatched set, but hey, that's how I roll. All right, deal with it, bitch.
Well, I'm a little outdated in my attire, so like
half of Eastern Europe has a combination of like old Soviet gear and new US gear. It's fine.
Oh, in fact, Ukraine received like what was it?
5,000 German helmets.
Yeah, and stuff from the US too.
Are those cool pointy German helmets or?
Oh, I wish they were pickle helmets. That would be amazing.
Those are like World War I, right? Yeah. Oh man.
Well, we have a repeat guest with us, Powers Chandler, and he will balance my general ignorance of world conflicts. And I will just be here for stupid jokes for the moment.
This is an exciting one because we could all be proven disastrously and horrifyingly wrong. Just anytime.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Oh man, hey, I gotta take this helmet off. This thing is heavy.
I might leave mine on because I've been without heat for like 3 weeks.
Oh well, hey, hold on a second. Hey broski, I could be just like you. Hey, all right.
No one told me we were doing prop comedy. I had props. I could have had them.
Yeah, mine's an actual like Russian hat, like
nice.
Real deal.
Yeah. I have one of those that I'd call an actual Chinese hat because I got it in China, but it was it still cost about $2.
I gotta say, like when it's cold, these hats are the best.
They're amazing. You fold the ears down.
Oh yeah, you pulled it. Yeah. Oh God, it's so warm. I totally get like even today that like centuries old technology is still totally useful.
Centuries old technology of mink and beaver.
Yeah. Well, now you can do synthetic, so you don't have to kill animals if you're one of those people.
Now, were it not black, it would also provide coolness in extremely hot temperatures because it works on the principle of the chef's hat, where there's a space above your head encapsulated by the hat that is theoretically cooler than the hot kitchen that chefs work in. And things like that.
Universally useful, truly the people's hat.
Exactly. Now there might be like a snow camo version that's white, so you could do what you're talking about. I'm pretty sure they have something similar to that. Yeah. So well, I mean, I guess we should kind of like dive into this. Oh wait, hold on a second. Wait, I can like, since I had a mismatched set, I've got my Russian hat. I got my 1911 at the same. Yeah. All right. How about mismatching? I could double mismatch now.
How many goddamn guns do you have just sitting there?
Well, I have a Derringer over there, a 357 Derringer, which you don't want to shoot, by the way, because it'll cut your hand.
Oh dear.
Yeah. More ants. Yeah.
Is that the one you just leave near the front door with blanks in it, and then like somebody busts in and they grab the gun and they like not only not shoot you, but they cut themselves?
Yeah, that's the gun with where the barrel like turns around, does a U-turn.
And a little flag that says "bang" comes out.
Yeah.
I was just thinking you might as well put blanks in a Derringer because that's about how far it would still be lethal. Just the air pressure.
Well, yeah, I mean, now, okay, so just since we're on the subject of guns and stuff, 357 Magnum Derringer pistol. This is my steampunk gun. Really cool, but 357, like that's a pretty powerful cartridge.
Oh, I didn't mean
a tiny ass gun.
I didn't mean it would bounce off you. I meant it would just go veering off somewhere. Such a short barrel.
They're close range. It's not intended necessarily for like being a sniper or something.
Now the question you got to ask yourself is, do I feel stumpy? Well, do you, punk?
Well, actually, there's this whole kind of thing going around where people are like cocking guns and then like feathering the trigger with a loaded gun pointed at their fucking junk. And some people have shot themselves. So yes, you might feel stumpy after that.
Why are they doing that?
I have no idea. I don't know. Like, that is the stupidest thing you could ever do.
Is that like the latest TikTok challenge?
Yeah.
Or whatever?
Yeah. It's some kind of thing that's going around. Oh yeah. The last gun I have here is speaking of like close range stuff, is little Raven Arms MP25 25 ACP pistol. Very short barrel, not deadly, but like the Derringer, it's kind of a close range thing. Actually, that particular pistol, the Derringer, has interchangeable barrels, so you can get it in like 410 shotgun shells and stuff. So a lot of people use them on ranches as like a snake gun because it's like convenient, close range.
This felt like I fired a 357 like quite a bit in with a like 6-inch barrel full size revolver, and it's not horrible recoil there, but I feel like that Derringer would break my arm with that same round, or break my wrist anyway.
Oh yeah, it's a little potent. But
not a lot of weight for the pressure to go into in the gun.
Exactly. So now that we got the guns out of the way, why don't we get to the topic at hand?
Yeah, bigger and more guns.
Yeah, exactly. So, we should talk about like kind of the current goings on. I know about you guys, but I grew up in the 80s. That was when I was like in elementary school and kind of a teenager and stuff. And the Cold War was very much a thing. This like all, war games and all this stuff. Every movie practically in the 80s somehow connected to the Cold War, nuclear Armageddon, things like that. I was concerned about that. That was a thing that I thought about. We did drills in school. Like, oh, well, if a nuke drops, get under your desk. I don't know what that's going to do against like gamma rays and the fallout and stuff, but
were the desks like lead or something?
Oh, they probably were, because I think they were from like the 50s.
Full of asbestos.
Full of asbestos and lead and like all the dangerous stuff. But
so it's like you don't know where the bomb's going to drop. If it dropped like 4 miles away from you, then hiding under your desk might help when your building collapses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Most of the people hiding under their desks is not going to do a lot for.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway,
but that's the thing that like this whole particular circumstance really troubles me. Growing up in that era, like the mutually assured destruction sort of thing was a very real, very scary thing. That like, hey, the Soviet Union has thousands or more nukes. We have no idea. We have a whole bunch of nukes. Everybody's got nukes. And if some kind of hot war kicks off, well, then they're going to start launching them, and lots of them, like obliterate the planet. And nuclear winter was a concern. And it's like, I I don't know that people are dumb enough to do that nowadays, but
yeah, they are.
There's a part of me that's kind of like, I'm really concerned because, you know, from the outside, it looks like it's just, okay, Russia's dick wagging against Ukraine, and, you know, maybe there's going to be a little bit of conflict. But then everybody's talking about getting involved, and, you know, how much military support is considered an act of aggression or war or whatever that's worthy of launching nukes. And the nukes aren't targeted towards only military installations. It's indiscriminate. Like, living here where I live in Tacoma, I'm not that far away from JBLM, a military base, or Bangor, the nuclear sub base. I mean, if they're going to launch like a full powered Tsar bomb there, because they're like, well, that's a military place, I'm dead. Like, that's it.
Where are the nuclear vessels?
Indeed.
Well, do you think though that we're going to enter into some kind of Cold War 2.0? Because I mean, let's face it, anytime somebody goes to war in the world, the US is like, let's join.
Yeah, we've got to get involved in some way. You know, Team America, World Police, yet again. Like,
this is kind of an interesting version of that, because America wants so desperately for this not to be happening right now, so that it can shift all its attention to the Pacific. So it's looking at the Russia problem and being like, okay, we really can't back off from the NATO allies, and Ukraine, why did we get involved? We really, really want to focus on the South China Sea and Taiwan, but crap. Well, it's sort of the way America's looking at it now.
That's something that like really concerns me, because Russia and China are pseudo buddy. Like, I wouldn't say they have like a great relationship, but they do trade and sort of interact. It's not perfect, but I am a little worried that because I've heard rumors, shall we say, that if one team makes a move, the other will too, because, well, why not? It's the perfect time. And from the Russian standpoint, the winter's the perfect time to do it too, because if there's sanctions on Russia because of their actions in Ukraine, the EU purchases a very large proportion of their energy materials, like propane, coal, and whatnot, stuff that heats houses and produces energy, from Russia. And so if they were to be pressured by, well, let's admit it, it's the US that would pressure them to impose sanctions, well, then in the middle of wintertime, they would be left without resources. So it's kind of the perfect time. And China's kind of sitting there waiting, like, ooh, a tantalizing morsel, Taiwan. We're going to grab that up. You know,
I feel like it's going to be our fault that if and when something kicks off, because we're just like, we're waiting for the divorce to finalize with Afghanistan, and we're on the poll and we're like, China or Russia? And we're just kind of like courting both of them. And we're like, who do we want to go to war with? And then they're both kind of like doing that rom-com thing where they're onto us for liking both of them, and they're like, well, why don't we team up? And
I mean, so to a certain extent, all of the situations right now are our fault, which is not to say that Russia or China are the good guys.
No,
you're right. Yes.
Like for instance,
are there good guys in war?
Yeah, no, but even
never.
Even just like the evolution of the situation itself, like Russia has been a bad actor like throughout the things that have been going on, but it has frequently been in response to even just like comments about NATO expansion, like even the war in Georgia. You guys remember in 2008?
Oh yeah.
That immediately followed comments about places like specifically Ukraine and Georgia joining NATO and its expansion that were essentially like feeling like Russia had been sort of neutralized as a global threat because it really wasn't keeping up economically or militarily. Like it couldn't really sustain this. And so NATO starts, or I should say instead, representatives start talking about the idea of NATO expanding to Ukraine and to Georgia, and let's invade Georgia immediately.
Mhm.
And again, in that situation, kind of like in Ukraine, you've got a pro-Russian and sometimes Russian-speaking minority in the country that is actually supportive of that. So Russia has like a thing to grab onto and like reach in, but it's usually about expansion of NATO, and it's usually about fear.
Yeah, exactly. And my understanding is like Eastern Ukraine is very much pro-Russia.
Mm-hmm. They're linguistically Russian. Some of them are less pro-Russian now, the ones that weren't really a fan of the things that happened. But
yeah.
I mean,
but they are ethnically and linguistically Russian.
Mhm.
Languages are so similar that they're like, you can, if you understand one, you can understand each other.
Yeah, it'd be like different dialects within like the US, or talking to a Southerner if you're a Northerner, like the language, but there might be some stuff that's kind of like, wait a minute.
Or maybe between like us and Britain or something,
Yeah, exactly.
I've heard that a good comparison. I do not know. I know Das Vidania and Nostrovia. I do not know enough about the Russian or Ukrainian languages, but I've heard it compared to sort of Spanish and Italian. Like, for instance, when I was in Italy and didn't speak a word of Italian, I tried speaking Spanish, and people understood me. They thought I sounded like a toddler who couldn't actually speak, but they understood what I wanted sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I just kind of wonder what the whole point. Just isolate the Russia-Ukraine side of things. Like, what is the point? Because war is always a net negative.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least in a big picture sort of way. You destroy property, you kill people. People die on both sides. You lose a lot of money. You go into debt, and typically you don't really get much out of it at the end. And if you do, then you're on the hook to reconstruct, because you want to be seen as the good guy. So what's the point?
Honestly, no one understands that lesson probably better than Russia, the country that won World War II, losing significantly more than 10% of its population in the process.
Yeah.
And they ended up capturing a lot of buffer states and like puppet governments that, from their perspective, were absolutely necessary, because it turned out their armies, when they'd been suddenly attacked, could not stand up to Western armies whatsoever. And you've sort of carried a fear about that ever since.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think they understand that principle, that even winning the war is not necessarily great. And the Soviet Union did, of course, go on to be one of the two superpowers afterward. But then the question is, how much better would they have done if they had not gone through that war?
Yeah. Well, and I do want to point out, because a lot of people don't realize this, they think the U.S. in the eastern side of things, at least from our perspective, the U.S. was not the party that won that war with Germany. It was Russia, the Soviet Union. Like, they were the ones that did all the dirty work.
I would definitely agree that they did all the dirty work, although I would say it was very much a team effort, and both groups sort of try to downplay the other one's contribution. The US's contribution in the East was through Lend-Lease and just unbelievable amounts of material. And I don't mean tanks, although there were lots of those. I mean rail cars. I mean trucks. At one point, I believe 90% of the USSR's trucks were being shipped in from the United States in order to help try to supply and get troops to the front and everything. So essentially, the U.S. contribution to the war on the Western Front for the invasion of Normandy, that was very helpful to the Russians, dividing German attention. But the Russians were still the ones doing the vast majority of the fighting and dying against Germany in that war. The biggest help that the U.S. probably gave them was through just material support, so that Russian factories could all focus on producing tanks and rifles and bullets, and the U.S. took care of everything else.
And I think we were supposed to be more of a cushion for Britain, weren't we?
Mm-hmm. We essentially just did what's frequently called the arsenal of democracy, which slightly ironically extended to the Soviet Union. But yeah, probably the biggest thing that the United States did in World War II was just material support for all of the non-weapons of war aspects of the Allied economies. But I essentially, I would call it very much a team effort, but there's no question that Russia suffered by far the most in fighting up Germany.
Well, especially if you add in, and this might be, some of their actions might be in response to German invasions of Russia. Mm-hmm. That like they might have just been pissed enough to go hog wild and go into Berlin and kick ass and chew bubblegum.
Oh, I'm sure the things that happened to the cities of the formerly under the control of the Soviet Union cities in Eastern Europe and Soviet cities themselves were on a level of horror that I can't even imagine. So yeah, I would imagine that they did have quite a lot of pent-up anger in that situation.
Oh, for sure.
You know, I didn't even think about it. I have a friend from Ukraine. I should have invited him on.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, that would have been good.
Yeah.
You should do it. You should do another thing with inviting him on to get like insider's perspective of how people feel in the country. Like,
I mean, he's lived here a long time, but I do remember when I worked with him, he kind of expressed some sentiments of not really appreciating Russia that much. At least that's the vibe I got. And I don't know if that was just the political climate at the time, you know, going back about 6 years or so.
I imagine that if you like a person who considers himself Ukrainian had a problem with Russia 6 years ago in the 2004, well, I guess that would be now 2016. God, the pandemic and time.
Exactly.
But if they had a problem with Russia following the Crimean invasion, it probably hasn't gotten better since then.
Well, and from what I understand, Putin's basically saying that they're not even like a legitimate country or something, right?
Ukraine?
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of. And well, Putin has written and spoken a lot on the idea of Ukraine and Russia being a linked people with one soul. Which
sounds very North and South Korea to me.
A little bit.
Well, yeah.
Ukraine and Russia have really, for most of modern history, not been different entities. They were their own. They weren't just part of Russia and the Soviet Union. There was the Ukrainian SSR, just like there was the Russian SSR of the USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republics. Ukraine was its own. And there was, at certain points, a lot of sort of discrimination against Ukrainians inside the Soviet government, particularly to do with, do you know what the Holodomor is? The famine in Ukraine?
Oh, yeah, okay. Yep, I've heard of that, yeah.
So a lot of that had to do with sort of changing the way that farming worked, and a lot of like peasants who had sort of been like liberated in the revolution under Lenin, that then were looking at their land being taken for collectivization under Stalin and rebelling against that, leading to an idea that Ukrainians overall were disloyal to the Soviet cause. And a lot of sort of, it's called the Holodomor because it can be considered like, it is frequently considered a like tiny version, or when I shouldn't say tiny, it's considered a less extreme version of a Holocaust to them. Like they see it as like intentional starving, and a lot of people were absolutely intentionally killed for trying to like bring up issues about it. But you know, the question of whether collectivization of farmland was intentional starving or whether that's a muddied issue. Anyway, the point is Ukraine and Russia have both existed as linked entities for most of modern history, even back in the Russian Empire, even like for most of the history of the Russian Empire. And like the Kievan Rus believed to have given their name to Russia, that have been like essentially linking with the Duchy of. I'm going to skip ahead and not get too lost in the weeds. They are very linked and have had a lot of problems with each other at the same time. And Putin has described them as having like a single soul and essentially being historically a single people, whereas a lot of ethnic Ukrainians, particularly in the north and west of Ukraine, would bristle at that idea. But I haven't actually heard him suggest that they're not truly an independent country. I've heard him suggest that essentially their destiny is bound with Russia.
Well,
which is,
I don't think
sorry, go ahead.
I don't think he said independent. He said legitimate. So like, I think he's basically trying to say he doesn't recognize them as being a separate entity from Russia.
Yeah. I think you could definitely get that from some of his comments, although I think he was speaking sort of philosophically more than refusing to acknowledge the existence of the Ukrainian government. And he also does believe that the current Ukrainian government is essentially like election interference from the West. So that would be one area where he'd say that.
Huh. Oh yeah, that was kind of a, what was that, 2016? That was kind of the thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So there are a lot of things going on there, and then there's also like, do you guys have an impression of sort of Russia's fear when it comes to like geography?
Well, in what way do you mean?
So there's one reason that the Ukrainian military, even though it's actually got more people currently on its borders than Russia does, with it, you hear all the time about the 100,000 Russian troops on the border.
Oh, that's nothing. Ukraine, I think, has like what, 900,000, maybe.
That 900,000
count their reserves.
Yes, they have 900,000 reservists who would need time to be trained and called up. They've got 145,000 active troops. Mm-hmm. And Russia has 100,000 troops on the border and could easily ship in another like 50,000. But yeah, the Russian force on the border isn't really prepared to conquer all of Ukraine and then hold it. But so yeah, with the situation that's going on there. So one of the reasons that Russia, even with only 130, 140, whatever they shipped in right for the invasion, one of the reasons that they could absolutely blow past the Ukrainians without a lot of trouble, honestly, like guerrilla fighting would be a real problem for them, but they could encircle the Ukrainians, is that Eastern Ukraine is completely flat.
Yeah.
There aren't even major rivers.
That was what I was going to bring up, is like, essentially what Russia could take easily is tundra. Like, it's flat land. It's really kind of useless. I mean, sure, they have superior technology. It's very obvious if you look at like the Russian Air Force and some of their tanks and their technology, way superior to what Ukraine has. And I don't know that it's like a force of numbers thing, but when it comes to guerrilla fighting, it absolutely is. And yeah, sure, Russia could totally take Ukraine or part of it pretty easily. But then what? Like, now you have a protracted war, like a guerrilla war that could last for years or decades or something, where like essentially similar to the US and Afghanistan, actually. You don't know. There's no actual enemies wearing military gear and badges and stuff. They're just like people coming out of the shadows and killing you. That's kind of what I see happening later. And that is kind of why I asked that question. Why? What's the point? Why even bother with this?
So the flatness of Eastern Ukraine is actually one of the reasons to bother with it, because the flatness of Eastern Ukraine is not isolated. It's part of a gigantic sort of plateau, a piece of flat land that also goes deep into southern Russia all the way to the Caspian Sea. Okay. So imagine that Ukraine joined NATO with its current borders, and then NATO was able to actually build up armored formations on the border of Eastern Ukraine. From Russia's perspective, if NATO won that initial border clash, a NATO army could drive to the Caspian Sea and cut Russia off from all of its oil and one of its most resource-rich regions, and also be able now to attack Moscow from 4 sides in a day and a half.
That's where we're going to come in. Oil.
They have absolutely, but they have absolutely no natural defenses from their border to the river, Donbass, I think. Anyway, the river that Kiev is on. So essentially, like, there are no actual ways to stop a NATO armored column if they win the conflict on the border from just carving Russia to pieces from that direction. It's also the reason that they were so worried about the Baltic states being, joining NATO, that are so close. There's more natural defense there, but they are so close to St. Petersburg, and they are much closer to Moscow. But armored formations, the same way that Russia can, with a similar amount of troops with more armor, just punch through the Ukrainian defenses. NATO could do the same if they started at the same place, deep into Russia, and cripple them. So the point of taking Eastern Ukraine from that perspective would be that they essentially now have a defensible geographic border, which is the gigantic river that cuts through the middle of Ukraine. And it is the first border from the heartland of their territory to NATO. It is the only one that they can get to.
And I guess that kind of makes sense. And it's my understanding that a lot of the conflict with Ukraine has to do with preventing Ukraine from being a part of NATO.
Yeah, NATO and the EU, that's pretty much the entirety of it. And even Putin's descriptions of them as a single linked people is very secondary to the security concern of not having Ukraine be a bastion for NATO or the EU, which the EU is gradually becoming more organized when it comes to its own military. So to Russia, that's an eventual equivalent to NATO. Even if Ukraine didn't join NATO, if it joined the EU security cooperation, that would basically be the same thing. Because you fight the EU, most of them are also NATO members. You fight one, you fight the other.
I could see that. Man, I mean, with so much on the line today, with the technology we have today, and I mean, well, let's face it, nukes they existed since before any of us were born. It is coming up on 100-year-old technology, and I worry about some of the modern stuff like robots and viruses and things like that, whatever kind of crazy wackadoodle shit exists out there.
Satellite stuff China has.
Oh yeah. I worry about that. If conflict erupted, what would we resort to resolve this? I say we. I shouldn't say that because I would never do that. I'm a hippie peacenik. I'm not in favor of any kind of conflicts like that. Yes, I have a lot of guns.
I was about to say, I was hoping you were going to pull the slide on the gun again.
But defense, that's legitimate. Mm-hmm. But offense doesn't make sense to me, especially when innocent lives are at risk. I can't understand that. It doesn't make sense. And
that's why the geography issue is actually really important, is because essentially, in this case, let's imagine that so even if it wasn't Putin, and let's ignore any ideas about Putin's anything about megalomania or wanting to restore the Russian Empire or anything, even if it wasn't him, they would still have a critical security interest here that they might invade over. Because the geography is exactly what you're saying. If they don't have a border at the river, if NATO can put troops in Eastern Ukraine, and they don't have a natural defensive border, then for them, defense becomes impossible. So to them, the idea of this would be that offense is necessary to have defense be possible.
I get that. It's just, there's so much at stake with an actual hot war. Sending troops into a country that is a very aggressive act.
Yeah, it terrifies me.
Yeah.
Also, when you were mentioning the use of nuclear weapons, or what would be used in a situation like that, I mean, on the smaller side, which I hesitate to even say the smaller side, but satellite warfare terrifies me. And I don't mean things coming down from up there. I mean blowing things up there. Because have either of you ever heard of Kessler syndrome?
No. Enlighten us.
It's essentially the idea, we've got a lot of space debris that's orbiting the Earth. at just insane speeds. And we have a lot of satellites up there at all these different like layers. And the near Earth orbit space is vast. So it's very unlikely for any individual piece of space debris to hit anything. But when you blow up a satellite, you've essentially created a giant shotgun blast of shrapnel that travels all the way around the Earth over and over and over, spreading out.
So all those pieces basically become shrapnel that could impact something else, like, I don't know, the ISS. Well, at least if it's in the same orbit. And
the reason that it's, and even if it's not, because of the like power from the explosion, it can actually stretch into different orbits, and then it'll slowly decay back to where it's going, but it could hit stuff in that time. The reason it's called a syndrome is that the terrifying possibility is not that it just hits something like the ISS, it's that it hits anything else which also explodes, and hits anything else which also explodes, and also explodes, and also explodes.
GPS is gone, cell is gone.
And it becomes basically impossible to actually even send spacecraft up, because they need to be so armored, and you wouldn't have an opportunity to deliver anything into space. And we are essentially dropped back to before the space age for maybe the next several hundred years.
Huh. You know, did you guys hear that NASA just announced they're going to crash the ISS into the Pacific in 2031? I kind of wonder if this is why. They're like, well, now, you know, like private industries can afford to make their own space station with our help. But, you know, like, I think they're probably just like, we better just.
There was also actually a pretty serious, speaking of Russia, there was a pretty serious issue of suspected Russian sabotage on the ISS a while ago. Won't go into detail about that, but one of the reasons that they essentially, it was something that really shouldn't be able to happen without sabotage, and they were able to fix it. But also Russia is building its own space station, along with like China building its own, and essentially the ISS mission, without being like linked between the West and Russia, is no longer really that viable. And so it looks like we're all moving to our own space stations now.
Oh man, you know, this pisses me off, because we were so close.
I know.
The original Russian space station, Mir means peace. And the ISS was kind of the same kind of vision, like global interaction, people going up into space and doing cool stuff. And, you know, if you gaze at Earth from orbit, you realize how small it is. Like you just have to be an astronaut. All those chuckle fucks that were quote unquote astronauts on like Virgin Galactic and stuff, like they saw Earth from a distance far enough to realize how small it is. And it just blows my mind that we could today, knowing all we know, possibly be concerned enough to like kill each other over like what amounts to bullshit, basically.
Like that Carl Sagan quote when he had the Voyager spin around and take the picture of the pale blue dot suspended in the sunbeam. About how every prince and every beggar, every tyrant and every saint, everyone you've ever known or ever will know, all existed on that tiny pale blue dot suspended in the sunbeam.
Oh, dude. See, everybody should take that to heart.
I've even heard a secondhand a quote from an astronaut. I'm not sure if they actually said this in the way that I heard it, but it was a cool idea. It was essentially that any world leader that is going to be given the codes to nuclear weapons has to be brought up into space to view the Earth from that scale.
Oh, that is a really good idea. Oh man. Because that is the thing. Like when you couple our 100-year-old nuclear technology with nanobots and stuff like that, it gets really scary. Like a bunch of megalomaniacs, a bunch of narcissists and crazy people. And I mean, I don't know how y'all feel about that, but you know, to me, any politician, any bureaucrat is essentially one of the above. You know, giving them access to these tools that are destructive tools, like there is no constructive purpose. It's destructive. We have all of this. Like, essentially, if somebody decided, if they went crazy enough and quote push the button, and it's not as easy as that, but let's say they did, well, all life on Earth would be extinguished, and that would be it. Over what? Like some borders, some bullshit stuff like, oh, I don't want you to join NATO. Well, what is NATO? Like, well, that's made up too. It's all made up.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, this is pissing me off.
My fear of being in danger of possibly being killed in the future is causing me to kill everyone now.
Yeah, exactly.
So what really scares me about Kessler syndrome is that a lot of older like military thinkers that are in power now don't seem to grasp how bad that is. As they talk about, like, even as they test anti-satellite weapons, like not in war, they just test them. And that already just scares everyone in the space industry to death, because you never know when it could start. It gets more likely every time it happens. And thankfully it hasn't happened. But in the event of a like war, where, for instance, even without US troops on the ground, the US might share information with Ukraine from its satellite network.
They are. That's a given. They definitely are.
In the midst of war, like sharing active satellite feeds of like battlefield movements with Ukraine. And let's say that Russia decided to like, I don't think it would, because I do think this would expand into further war. But the problem is so many older generals don't see it as the same thing as killing a soldier, as far as being a true like active brutal war. So they would see destroying satellites as, you know, not nearly as bad as any of the other things that they could do. And so they're more likely to do them.
It's just a modern version of like sneaking around the back and burning the barn and torching their fields and basically depriving them of food. It's like something that your society relies on to operate day to day.
And in this case, they don't realize there is no fire break whatsoever between their fields and our fields.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, like, with satellites up there, some of them like privately owned, if I'm not mistaken. Wouldn't this be akin to like testing missiles in our backyard somewhere?
Yes.
You know, like, because, you know, you're in constant motion. So basically your property is everywhere at any given moment. So it's like, we maybe should be pushing back like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
Here, my belief on this is like, I don't mind politicians and bureaucrats having disputes. They're going to dispute just like anybody else. But, you know, if, I don't know, you and I, Casey, have a dispute, we're going to take it to the street. We're going to go outside and stuff. Like you and I'm not going to hire somebody else like a big ass goon to fight you. And you're not going to hire a big ass goon to fight my goon. Like, we're going to like face to face and face off and settle our dispute. And chances are, in my experience with dispute settlement, like in that regard, it results in people becoming better friends.
Well, speak for yourself. I'm going to go to the poorest high school in town and get all the near graduates to come and fight for me.
And that is the thing. As soon as he does that, you now have to completely rethink your idea of how this conflict is going to go and what you're willing to do for it.
Well, exactly. But that's the problem, is like the people fighting these conflicts, they don't even know what they're fighting over. They don't know the people they're fighting. Like, think of any war. Pick a war. The soldiers that shot another soldier, did that soldier personally do something wrong to you? Like the soldier that did the shooting, I guess, or the killing? Like, probably not. And yet that's how all these conflicts occur. Like, why? Who would take up arms? Yes, I have an AK, but I would never shoot somebody with this AK unless they did me personally wrong. Like, you came to my house and did something bad. Like, that is a wrong thing.
Powers, you might know this. At what point in our history did kings stop running into battle with the rest of their troops and it just be like, hey, go fight for me?
So it really, that transition started to become like really common around the late 1600s and early 1700s. Like most places, you didn't have kings running into battle with their troops, but you still did. You still, for instance, had the initially like 13-year-old, and then like by the end of his campaigns, like maybe 18-year-old king of Sweden.
Nice.
Yeah, and he was actually like leading his grenadiers in battle constantly, like being the first one into a charge. So it still happened then.
That's Viking blood for you, though.
Yeah.
Yes, pretty much. And you could probably say that it absolutely ended by the point of the, at least for Western style warfare, it absolutely ended by like the middle of the 18th century, like 1750, stuff like that, as at the point where like just the odds of you being absolutely slaughtered if you were the tip of the spear were extremely high. But then again, you still had Napoleon, who was at least on the battlefield in the early 1800s. So I'm not sure when. And
the Civil War too. You know, like
you didn't have Jefferson Davis or Abraham Lincoln on the field in either.
No, I was talking about generals, because wasn't that what Napoleon was?
No, Napoleon. But so at the point where Napoleon was still on the battlefield as emperor.
Oh.
That's what I meant.
Oh, okay.
Baller. Like that's man, you're putting your balls on the line there for what you believe. Like, I could see how people could get behind that. But
I'm sure it inspired more like the morale of his men.
Oh yeah, but today, you know, you have these people who aren't even generals making decisions way back in their safe havens on their ivory towers that everybody else is expected to comply with. You know, oh, if you don't, you're not patriotic and stuff. Oh, you better pick up that gun and shoot that dude that you don't even know. Like, why? Why should I do that?
You know why our country won't send their leader to battle is because we're like the only country in the world where we seem to only elect 75-year-old plus men. Like,
well, okay, yes, that is a thing.
But also there is like sort of an interesting debate where a lot of times the at least the like lower officers and stuff, people would be like, to the like overall, even the general, but especially like the leader of the country, like, get the hell back, you're not even helpful here. It's like too big, you can't see everything from here, so please go be safe so that we're not like cut off like a headless chicken if you die. But then at the same time, now they're protected back here and sometimes don't really feel the weight of the decisions that they're making. So like there's a big argument for not putting them in danger, and then a real problem with the fact that they're not in danger.
Well, yeah, because like when you're not in danger, everything becomes a numbers game, right? The like you're just looking at the numbers. So you see like who kills who, and it's just numerical. You're not witnessing people dying.
Yeah.
You're not personally at risk necessarily. So it really changes the perception and the whole decision-making process. That I think is a bad thing.
And it turns into a game of chess where it's like, oh, don't let the king get knocked over. But really, like, what would it matter if our president died in battle, right? Like,
well, everybody knows the queen is better than the king.
Yeah, but like somebody else steps up. It's not like we almost over venerate like the president or whatever, you know, like,
oh, we definitely over venerate the president. The main issue of what it would matter is that things can happen so fast nowadays that you take out the president and then people are starting to wonder who exactly has the absolute authority over the orders. Then you can do a whole lot of other stuff in the time where that confusion has happened.
That is true. That's very true.
But
although
on the flip side, it's not really confusing though. They've got like contingencies.
Yeah, there's a process.
Right. So in that case, you essentially have to go through. You buy maybe, half an hour of confusion on the first one, and then maybe another half hour on the second one, and then maybe an hour on the third one, and then you really have to go down the list. How long do you want confusion to happen? Because if you get to the point where you've killed the Secretary of Agriculture, then that's a problem.
Well, and I kind of wonder, like, we do have a process here in the US, but who built that process? Oh, it's the people that want us to defer to that process in the event of an emergency. Huh. Interesting. Like,
this is true, but also, like, when you say, for instance, that, like, and I agree, it's definitely a problem when leaders don't really even, like, know what it's like to, like, see death and to do, and so to them it's entirely a numbers game or a chess game. Sometimes you want that. If you want to win, you want dispassionate, like, decisions. If winning is really that critical. But there is also, though, a problem, like, of course, with not knowing what it is like to see soldiers go off to die, which leads a lot of people to elect generals. But we also know that doesn't frequently doesn't go well, because they elect generals because they started out low, like they saw men die. Right. And it turns out that electing generals is not usually a great idea. So we're sort of in an impasse.
Well, I think a lot of that comes from just like the drilling in of obedience, like through their whole career.
Which, absolutely.
Like, is not a virtue by any means.
Mm-hmm.
Good times had by all. Oh
yeah.
To get back to Ukraine, the reason that I brought up Kessler syndrome as the lesser issue was that essentially when you were talking about, like, what sort of weapons would be unleashed, and, like, let's say that, and here's really the other nightmare scenario than China and Russia acting at the same time, which, by the way, you guys know, God, so many things you guys know that Britain and the United States have essentially, like, explicitly stated that they will not send troops to defend Ukraine if Russia invades.
Yeah, they have stated that explicitly, but Vietnam, anyone?
Sure. But as far as the reason that they stated that, which, they could probably try to scare Russia more into not invading, if they said that they might, if they kept their options open and said, like, who knows if we're going to come to Ukraine's defense. One of the reasons that they said that they explicitly that they wouldn't was because they really, so one reason, of course, is to avoid miscalculations that lead to nuclear war. Another reason is that it lessens the chances that Russia and China are going to try to act at the same time, like you mentioned, with attacking Taiwan at the same time that Russia attacks Ukraine, because the U.S. could not win a war in both places at the same time.
Oh, no.
Essentially, the U.S. says, yep, we are not sending troops to Ukraine, China. We're not getting involved in that, China. Don't do it.
Although, I've always said my personal belief is the way to avoid war is sex and trade. Like, if you fuck your enemies and exchange goods and services with them, the odds of, like, wanting to actually go to war are going to be very slim. And China is kind of that place. Like, China shouldn't be that inclined to do anything too aggressive against the US, or vice versa, because, hey, we're trade partners. Like, our economies would essentially collapse if we went to war, because we're so dependent on each other.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that the Chinese, some of the Chinese leadership, every time you hear about some general saying, like, we would bury the United States in nuclear fire, you also then hear about someone just mentioning, like, very openly that, like, yeah, our most important relationship by far is with the United States. I don't know what form it's going to take, but I kind of hope it's a good one.
Mm-hmm. I would hope so too.
Also, speaking though of that idea of, like, making peace better with sex and trade, does raise of course the slight worrying thing that only about 1% of the United States imports and exports are to do with Russia, and only about 5% of Russia's are to do with the United States. So they're not very linked in trade.
No, but China is.
China is absolutely
to the US. So, like, yeah,
Russia, right?
Russia's more connected with the EU
mm-hmm.
than the US is. The US is definitely more connected with China than the EU is.
Yeah, we're in a love triangle with Russia and the EU. That's
exactly. Like, hey, can't we go, why don't hey, instead of like going to war, why don't we just like go to the bedroom? I've got flashing colors and it's fun.
Again, this turns into a Tinder ad for Eric.
Does that happen frequently?
It does, yeah.
Oh, there are viewers that like you too, Casey. So
this is where we cut away to clips of Eric going, by the way, I'm poly.
Like flexing and like, ooh, yeah.
Just get that gun out again.
Exactly.
But yeah, so
yeah.
At least as far as but one thing I would say is that like so like you see, like the United States sort of wants to pivot away from Russia, and while it's actually Central Europe especially that is actually really concerned about Russia, and the United States partly cares about Russia so much because it cares about that link to Central Europe, but the United States wants to pivot toward the Pacific, and Central Europe and Russia have lots of trade. So I'd agree with you that it is the best pathway to peace, but it also seems to be at a lower scale, the most likely thing to lead to concerns about war and fear of each other. Like, whereas the United States and Russia have barely any trade, and except for a historical issue that they had in the mid 20th century, they didn't think about each other a lot until recently, or at least the United States didn't think about Russia very much.
Mm-hmm.
So it does seem, and whereas the United States is extremely concerned about China, it does seem like both love and hate have a lot to do with the amount of trade that you have with those countries.
That's true.
So with the United States wanting to pivot away, but essentially needing to keep Central Europe on side, and remember, a lot of those people, it's not really the U.S. driving a lot of this. Some U.S. policies have helped create this. We are absolutely not blameless in this sort of situation coming up.
Oh, by no means. Yeah.
But it's really not the U.S. driving it at this point. There is a lot of like independent history with Central and Eastern Europe and Russia, and like, for obvious reasons, but also it's interesting when Germany talks about the SPD government has talked about not wanting to be militant to their east for like fears of repeating the past, like the old memory of 1939.
Where they got spanked by the Russians.
that was in 1940.
Are we still talking sex here, or?
Yeah, maybe we should be.
That was in 1944. There was a lot of horror before that, though, between those years. But one thing that gets overlooked, though, in considering that history, is that from like Eastern Europe's perspective, what first happened was the Germany and the Soviet Union working together to hurt them.
Yeah.
And then Germany went through and attacked Russia, and then ended up being more horrifying than anything that had happened before. But Eastern Europe also remembers the fact that Germany and Russia were colluding to hurt them, and so I don't think they necessarily see Germany's refusal to help right now as a noble thing.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. Oh man,
if we did become embroiled in war with two major world powers at the same time, that might be a good time to like throw a revolution too, and just kind of like get rid of the government and be like, you know what, we need to start over.
Well,
Russia, China, we really apologize. We didn't mean for that to happen. Please don't associate us with that.
I'm a different person now.
Yeah.
I'm reformed.
I've changed. Really,
it might be the most likely time to succeed. It's also historically been the most likely time for an otherwise liberal democratic government to bomb the crap out of the rebels in its own territory, assuming that they're foreign agents.
Yeah, and I'm all for revolution. Like, oh, don't get me started on the whole like Canada trucker thing. I think it's good, but we shouldn't replace one bad government with another. But hey, that's just me.
It's gonna slowly lay the groundwork for anarcho-syndicalism across the entire territory. It'll take a while.
It might take forever.
Pretty much, I think you got to win the war for unions first, and then you can talk about like the actual government moving in that direction to help.
Yeah. Oh, I don't expect a lot of change. But hey, why not try? I guess. I don't know. I at all points I aim to make the world a better place.
Sure.
And I think if you're like a politician or whatever, like you should try to do the same. Like, don't just tell people you're doing it. Fucking man up or woman up and do it. Like, put your money where your mouth is. Like, make it happen.
Oh,
make a difference.
For sure. But much like the conversation that we're having about how terrifying this war is, probably try everything before pulling the trigger for a bullet.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I'm yes, I know I have a lot of guns, but I'm a non-violent person. Like, I don't believe in violence. I believe it's the last possible resort. And when you have the ultimate violence, which is, well, mutually assured destruction, annihilation of all life on planet Earth, like, you should be extra careful. Like, you got to be like super hippie at that point.
I think
we have a lot of people that are not very hippie. They're very warmongering, and they're trying to convince everybody else that war is a good idea. Like, the fuck? Like,
I think
really?
The worst war is the psychological war.
Oh yeah.
The US government is actually really good at playing, especially even against its own people.
Propaganda is rife with this one.
Not just propaganda, but I think that whole insurrection, January 6th of 2021, I think they let stuff like that go long enough to like get a little traction, get a lot of attention on it, and then squash it, and then like build this idea that like, oh, these guys were idiots for trying something like that, and like make it out to be like something like the laughing stock would do, just to get people not to revolt. I don't want to
say that particular incident was a false flag, but yeah, that might have been.
I'm suddenly reminded of the Iran video when one of you just suddenly said, like, I don't mean to be conspiracy minded, and the other one of you went, yes, you fucking do.
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, I'm the guy that loves conspiracy theories, so it was probably me that said that.
You've definitely helped infect Casey on this one. It wouldn't be an insane thing for a government to do. Well, I think there's a big difference between false flag and letting something happen.
Yeah. Okay.
One requires a lot less work and a lot less people to keep quiet.
Yep.
True.
But also, so just to get back to Ukraine for a second, because there was just been so much to deal with, but there's one thing that really, really worries me that has to do with a lot of what we've talked about. And it was some war games that were about essentially a World War III scenario involving Allied forces and Russia, China, and North Korea. And essentially the idea there was that Russia moves on Eastern Europe at the same time as China moves on Taiwan, and North Korea essentially just decides to come along for the ride, figuring that the US will be distracted. So the three aren't even really working directly together.
It feels a lot like World War I in a way.
A little bit, yeah, with all these individual conflicts that just bring off to
dominoes kind of falling into place. Like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity. Hey, I've been wanting to do this forever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Why don't we do this?
It is quite like that. What really worried me about it, though, was that essentially they gave a lot of preparation time, and in the midst of the fighting, so like in the Korean Peninsula, Blue 4 actually got like pushed into a corner. Blue 4 allies, Red Force enemies, Blue 4 allies. So sorry, I'll just say allies. The allies got pushed into a corner and immediately asked for authorization to use tactical nuclear weapons in this war game. And in Eastern Europe, the Russians initially had huge success in cutting off the Baltics, which is also, if there were going to be a fight between NATO and the Russians, and the Russians were like afraid NATO was going to intervene, first thing they'd do is cut off the Baltics and get to their exclave, Kaliningrad, that's on the sea. It's like 60 miles between Belarus and that. So that's what they did, is cut that off to protect that, and also cut off the Baltic states in NATO. They did that. NATO pushed them all the way back and then circled them again. And the Russians also asked for release of nuclear weapons. And so the entire exercise just ended with all these actual officers in our militaries, in our military, like I'm playing on both sides, deciding that nuclear weapons were absolutely necessary in a fight that hadn't even hurt any cities yet.
Jesus.
They just didn't want to lose.
So I'm going to recommend, and I do this often, but I'm going to recommend everybody watch the movie WarGames.
The only winning move is not to play.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit dated, but it really isn't. Oh man. Oh, that really troubles me. Fuck.
Yeah, that scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
Like you, especially for the Allies, like you guys have overwhelming in most of these theaters, overwhelming conventional advantages. Like we spend so much money on our conventional military, even though we've got such a big nuclear force, specifically so that we can win fights without it ever going nuclear. So, in my opinion, if the Allied officer in the war game asks for the release of nuclear weapons, you have fucking failed.
That's a good point. It's, you know what? Actually, that's a really good point. Like, going nuclear is essentially like, well, I lost this chess battle, so I'm gonna throw the board off the board. Like, yeah, fuck that shit. I'm done. I'm not gonna play anymore. Take your skateboard and go home.
If the chess battle is for your life or the life of your best friend, then yeah, fucking be like, no, I'm not gonna accept this fucking chess game. I'm gonna punch you in the face now that I've lost this chess game. But you don't flip the board just because you lost the chess game if no one's immediately about to die.
Right.
Well, and that's really the important thing in my view, is seeing, like, we're all humans. It doesn't matter what political alignment you ascribe to or where you live on Earth. Like, this is a very tiny place in a very backwards corner of the galaxy. Like, we're insignificant. Like, we should be, yes, I know we have made marvelous strides and done some amazing things, but we should be very careful not to do stupid ass things because we disagree. Like, if you disagree, duke it out in the street, at recess, go outside and stuff like that.
Maybe do that behind the Dairy Queen.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we should be doing that. Like, the last possible thing we should do is the nuclear option, or worse. Like, nuclear is not the worst thing. Like, nanobots scare me even more, and that is a real threat. Man, I honestly hope there are aliens out there who know better and are like, well, if these fuckers do something dumb, we'll just intervene.
Yeah, we'll come help and save them.
Yeah, we'll just put a stop to it. Like, that should happen.
If two individuals on the street can't stop themselves from resorting to a gun in a fist fight, then I don't think there's much hope for an entire country from not resorting to the nukes in a pretty stacked fight like this might be.
A country or an entire planet. That's the important distinction there.
Most of the generals essentially hope that even the generals, almost all of them, do not want this kind of war, because they know that how dangerous it is and how quickly it can go to none of my tactics matter. It's all. But all of the hope there, if there ever was a fight like that, would be that essentially nobody actually send troops into Russian territory. Nobody send troops into United States territory or deep into Europe, and we can all not nuke each other, because this fight can all be about stuff that as sort of like ruthless as it feels. Yeah, we're willing to have like the Baltic states and stuff like that be fought over if it means not having nuclear weapons fired. But yeah.
Do any of these situations ever go through a mediation stage? Or is it all just like who's got the bigger dick?
Actually, right now they sort of are. That's one thing that we should definitely talk about before we finish, is that, like, what's likely to actually happen. So like Russia, like you mentioned before, that like Russia does not have enough troops on the border to actually fully conquer Ukraine. Because of the troops in Belarus, they probably could actually breeze past the Ukrainian army and put all its major cities, including Kiev, the capital. They could go around the river because of Belarus. They could probably like get Ukraine to surrender very quickly, but it's not. They couldn't occupy the territory or conquer all of its military with the troops that they have, and that's not really the point. And when I say this, I don't want you to think that this means that the idea of an invasion is off the table. Russia's main thing appears to be trying to actually get concessions out of NATO and the EU about the future. Like, that's what they're mostly trying to do with this threat. Like, they released a series. Have you guys seen the demands they've asked of NATO?
No.
So essentially, they have said that, one, guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO. And at one point, at least, they also had suggested the EU. That might have already been taken off the table. Two, no more eastward expansion of NATO. So any other countries that, aren't in NATO yet don't join if they're in Eastern Europe. And three, a removal of allied forces from NATO countries on Russia's border.
Ooh.
As you can imagine, the Ukraine promise, we probably can't do if we're trying to describe NATO as just a totally voluntary, not offensive organization. Like, it would be very strange morals to say, like, all right, yeah, we'll never let them agree to join in, whereas we'll agree to let anyone else choose for themselves. The other two are like, absolutely no, we could never agree to that, ever. In a million years, the whole alliance would be pointless. And Russia knows that. Like, they're very aware of that. So I'm pretty sure that the point of those demands is that they then lower their demands to something that we can agree to, and it looks much more reasonable coming down from that hyperbole.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a standard sales tactic.
Yeah.
Yep.
Somebody asks you how much something is, and you say, well, it's $1 million. And that's like, whoa, that's really expensive.
It's the Craigslist effect. Like, if you want $40, you got to ask 80.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And Russia still deals a lot in, they still consider what's like usually called realpolitik as sort of the standard, which is not what is the moral question, what is the actual interest of the nations involved, is usually how they think of it. And a lot of our misunderstandings happen from the fact that we've stopped looking at it that way in a lot of senses after the fall of the Soviet Union and feeling like we were invincible. And we started looking at principled diplomacy, and even in all our arrogance and all of our dismissing the interests of other countries, we still looked at it from the idea of our version of morality and our version of principle. Russia's still looking at it as realpolitik. We're starting to have to move to that. But so essentially they go with those, and then they bring down their demands, and they use the real threat of force to get the negotiations to happen and get the negotiations to be on a timetable that we'll pay fucking attention to and take their better offer, is what they hope. But I don't want you to think that that means they won't invade Ukraine, because the best bluff is one that you're absolutely willing to follow through on.
Yeah.
Even if you don't want the outcome to be the invasion of Ukraine, you have to be ready to do it if you want your pretty savvy opponents when it comes to military and political intelligence to buy it. So essentially, I think that they are ready to do either, and they hope that they won't need to invade Ukraine.
I would hope not. Oh, man. Ooh,
That's some heavy stuff.
Very. Man.
I mean, I don't know how much longer you've got to share your ideas with us, but what do you think about the China-Taiwan situation?
Do you mind if I take a quick bathroom break, and then I've got plenty of time to talk about that?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Right.
Supposed to too, but
we can't cut to a real commercial right now.
Yeah, exactly. So go ahead, Powers. Take a pee break, and Casey and I will, I don't know, jabber at each other.
Jabber. All right, I'll be right back.
Well, in the meantime, we could have a short discussion about you had alluded to the Canadian truckers. And,
yeah.
Another former guest was trying to pick an argument with me today about that, saying that the U.S. has no idea what's going on. And
well, I honestly don't feel like many people have an idea of what's going on, because unless you subscribe to TikTok, you don't know what's actually happening, like why that is happening.
What does this have to do with TikTok?
But well, TikTok's kind of how videos are shared nowadays.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Well, so what? It's all about vaccine mandates, right?
No, actually, it's bigger than that. It's more about, like, individual freedom and like fighting back against all of the systems where it's like, there isn't a lot of necessarily factual data behind things, but then people decide, the people, the powers that be decide for everybody else what everybody else should do. And they've had enough. They're like, you know what? Fuck it. We're done. Like,
I'm still waiting to hear the actual transgression, though. Like, mandates aren't like strictly laws or anything, and
they are in Canada, and that's one of the things. Like, people have gone to jail over that, and I think people in Canada have just, like, basically had enough. And
is this the trucker revolution you were talking about? I don't know anything about that.
Oh yeah. Oh, hey, you're back already. Oh, now I can go pee. All right.
all right now, Casey, you explain the trucker revolution.
Well, apparently, and this is going to be a game of telephone, but
I'll stick around for a minute.
Yeah, so like there's apparently some truckers blocking the U.S.-Canadian border.
More than some. There's like a lot.
But it's based off of like the vaccine mandates and 15-day quarantine period upon returning from the the States if you aren't vaccinated. And it's the same thing we see here with people being like, oh my God, you're gonna make me get vaccinated or lose my job. And
okay, so that whole concept like goes deeper than that in Canada. Like, yes, to some extent, what you're saying, Casey, is correct, but there's a lot more moving parts there. It's deeper than that. There
are always more moving parts.
Yeah, exactly. There's a variety of people who are behind this movement for a variety of reasons. And to condense it down to like, well, it's only this one thing is, well, it's dismissing like the whole point. Like it's human rights and stuff.
No, I mean, I don't know much about the Canadian Constitution, or
it's irrelevant what the Constitution is. It matters humans. With the blue marble, like, we are humans on planet Earth. We have rights. Our rights are natural rights. And yes, I know, we've kind of...
Who decided that they were natural rights?
Well, nobody. Like nobody did. Like
I understand the trucker revolution now. You should go to the bathroom, or we're going to go down a gigantic rabbit hole of this.
I'm not going to say that anybody did. Like it's not like why does there have to be like a person deciding things? Why can't it be something that's global, that is a human condition based sort of thing? Like
I was just asking that somewhat facetiously because you always ask, like, well, who decided that for us? And
well, and okay, yeah,
I'm moving that back a step and saying, like, who says we have rights?
Yeah,
like, it's actually kind of an honest question.
That actually, no, I agree. Like, this is a conversation we should have because I really like this idea, and this kind of goes into a lot of different things, including the Russia-Ukraine conflict kind of thing. Like, this is a conversation we should really have. Like, probably one of the most important conversations ever to have. Oh man,
I think it's probably been one of the most important conversations ever throughout most of modern history. Well, at the same time, almost never being the most urgent conversation, because it's one that's going to be continued to be fought over and struggled over and thought about for the entirety of the human existence, because it's so fundamental to what and who we are.
Yeah.
But,
and like nobody, I don't claim to be right. Like, I don't think I have all the answers, and I don't think anybody else does. Like, that's why conversation is really important. Like, talking about things, like trying to come to some kind of common ground and understand what somebody else is saying, that's really important. Like,
I mean,
we could avoid fucking global nuclear war by having conversations.
Yeah, I proposed the question facetiously, but like the honest truth is that, like, you observe certain behaviors in humans, right?
Yeah.
And one of those behaviors is nobody likes to be told what to do.
Sure.
And, you know, it may or may not just come down to perception of what's actually like being told, or how hard it's being told, or if it's just a suggestion. But, you know, everyone's got their different line that they draw in the sand.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I would ask, like, okay, I should probably go pee, but you know, I would ask, like, while my teeth are floating, you know, who's right here? Who is the authority? Whose ideas are the correct ones? And how would you know if somebody's ideas were correct or incorrect? What criteria do you measure them on?
this is probably the seed of war, actually.
Yeah, you are correct in that.
So even in like the Declaration of Independence, the idea that of like inalienable rights from God wasn't actually because it was from the Bible. It was the idea that the divine monarchy concept of that time, they were essentially trying to like go around the king and be like, fuck the king's idea of what it is. These are directly from God. And that was from the what was called the Republic of Letters, which was like sort of a new thing in the Enlightenment, where learned people all over Europe were constantly sending each other letters arguing about these ideas. And they were trying to say, this has been our consensus. Fuck the king. We outnumber him like several thousand to one. God must mean this, because when we're using God, because the king's going to try to use God.
Okay, you know, that makes sense. You know, back then, it's incremental. Like, things evolve over time. Like, at that time, that might have been the best way to explain it. But today, well, science is the best way to explain things.
And even then, they did it with a bit of panache. You know, they were saying like the creator, or, you know, they were trying to be like inclusive and somewhat secular about it at the same time.
Yeah, that was a popular way to be able to have debates between less religious and more religious people in the Republic of Letters, like to be able to actually talk about what they wanted to talk about without stepping on each other's toes.
Mhm.
Yep.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna go pee real quick, so I'll be after these messages. We'll be right.
He finally did it again.
Well, okay, so I was asking you about China
and Taiwan. Yeah. Anything in particular that you want to know about it?
Being the ignorant lug that I am, I mean, I pay attention to things, but more like inwardly than outwardly. I didn't know much about what was going on in Ukraine or China or Canada. Like, people have to tell me these things, and then I go look it up, But I haven't really had a chance to look up what's going on there. Like, so I don't.
For sure. So, like, do you know anything about like the history of Taiwan? Like when it actually became like a thing?
Not really. I thought they were always just their own country.
So there is sort of a native people group of Taiwan that is not really the majority population, and honestly, it's very intermixed at this point. So basically the population of Taiwan can be considered Chinese, but there is more to it than that as well. But anyway, okay, Taiwan is an independent thing, has basically never existed in recorded history. There have been times where the island of Taiwan did not have anyone actually controlling it, even though some people would claim it.
Huh.
Even now, Taiwan's official name is the Republic of China.
Really?
Yeah. So essentially, the current Taiwan is a result of the Chinese Civil War, which was going on before World War II and after World War II. Essentially, the Chinese Civil War had a bit of a pause button with the Japanese invasions in the 30s, where they sort of worked together. And then as soon as Japan was defeated, the communists and the nationalists, who were the two groups who had essentially come out on top in the Chinese Civil War, fought each other again. And the communists had used the time during the truce very effectively to build up more support. And they kicked the nationalists' butt up and down China. And then essentially the nationalist leadership and their supporters fled to Taiwan, along with a lot of other refugees that were like trying to follow them away from the communist victory.
Jeez, that's a colorful history.
Yeah, and so then for about the next 10 years, no, probably even more than that, the Taiwan had China's seat in the United Nations as China, because the United Nations recognized the nationalist government of China as the official government, even though they controlled only Taiwan, and the communist government controlled the entire rest of the territory. So that's essentially what Taiwan is now, and why its official name is the Republic of China, whereas China is the People's Republic of China. It's two sides of a civil war that have been on essentially a cold front, where they haven't actually been fighting each other for the last 60 years. And the United States actually helped with the evacuation of the nationalist government over to Taiwan. We sent warships into the strait and sort of kept the pursuit from destroying the nationalists as they got over to Taiwan. And we were supportive of them as the official government of China, along with the UN, all recognizing them as the real government of China, right up until the 60s, when we finally went like, okay, you know what? They haven't actually controlled China in like 20 years. Fine. The communists are the real government of China. But we still had obligations that we had sort of set up to the nationalist government, which was dictatorial for most of the like latter half of the 20th century. Taiwan was more of a dictatorship than a democracy. They were almost like a war-footing government for the nationalist cause. Now they are actually like a pretty vibrant democracy. But that has not been true for the majority of Taiwan's history. But the United States has had sort of an obligation from when we were trying to help them against the Chinese communists from that point, and trying to keep Taiwan alive, because back then we considered them the real government of China. And once we finally acknowledged that the communists were the real government of China, we were still like, still got treaties and stuff with these people. Guess we'll make sure that they stay alive. So, and that's sort of when the United States had these sort of ambiguity policy of like treating Taiwan like an independent country, but never calling it an independent country, because a lot of Taiwanese people would say that they are an independent country, but the official name and everything is not even that. It's that they are the real government of China.
I've wondered this many a time, but like, what makes a country official?
I was actually gonna bring that up because I am a huge fan of Sealand.
And the recognition from the German government after the attempted coup in Sealand.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I've wondered, like, what does it take to be recognized as an independent nation? And it seems that it requires the affirmation from other independent nations in a large quantity to bolster your view that you're an independent nation.
Who decided that?
Nobody. That
the opposite of nobody. The whole concept there is that everybody, or enough of a percentage of everybody, that it becomes de facto truth. Well, but it's like that. It's like that line: "Power is a shadow on a wall."
Well, that may be true, but it's more a matter of governments than a matter of the people.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I should say everybody who has any influence on whether you actually get to stay independent.
Yeah. And I can imagine a world where it's like idiocracy, where it's like TikTok influencers that run the world.
But the only reason that they would run the world is that enough of people who actually were able to intervene or change things decided to listen to them. Mm-hmm. So it's still overall a process of decision making through everybody that we might think is stupid, but it's how many people are going to follow the decision making of this person who agrees that they are a country.
No, you're right. I just I'm concerned, like the tyranny of the majority. Like, are all the people who believe a thing, like if you have a majority of people believing a thing, are they necessarily correct? Like, is that your defining factor to determine if somebody is right?
Okay, so there's also tyranny of minority, though. And
true.
Let me ask you what is actually like objectively more negatively impactful on your life, like in any given day. So something like cancel culture is tyranny of the minority. It's the squeakiest wheel syndrome. Like, a few people are like, look at all the people being oppressed by this or offended by this. You can't do that anymore. And you just take them at their word that a bunch of people are really pissed off, but really it's just like 2%.
It just appears to be bigger than it really is, and it's because it's very loud. Yeah.
No, and that gives totally you that underdog feeling, like, oh, I better get behind this because they're the underdog. But they're not even that high on the rung. They're like beneath them.
Well, and they're only there because of faith, essentially. Like, that is what drives all of this. It honestly is faith. It's no different than religion. The people that are, quote, in control are only in control because people defer to them as their leaders or their masters or whatever.
Power is real, though. And I don't mean our guest Powers is because
I'm not.
Is it really, like, okay?
Quick side note: I typed my full name into a thing that was supposed to tell you in government records how many people are there with your exact name. And it said there are one or fewer. Or
holy
fewer.
Wow. Oh my God, dude.
I might not exist.
Holy shit. Wow. Hey, welcome to the club of aliens, bro.
If you ever release a solo album, it should be titled One or Fewer.
Oh man. So we do have a comment which I do want to kind of get to, but So let's go back into what you were saying.
Which part about Taiwan and the
Casey? Like he had brought up something just a minute ago.
Oh, did I? Was it poignant?
It was pretty poignant.
I'm 40 now. I don't remember 2 seconds ago.
Oh man. Have some more beer. How about another beer?
What's our comment?
I'm sure I've got some Jim Beam behind this.
All right, so we'll go into the. Okay. I mean, I feel like this was a pretty important thing we were talking about, but let's go into
power. Power is real, but yeah, let's go to the comment.
Oh, power. Yeah, yeah, Casey talking about power.
I'll write it down.
All right. So
the scribbling power is real over and over and over.
Oh, we're not going to get.
I hypnotize myself. Power is real. Power is real. Power is real.
That's exactly why it's real, by the way.
Well, yes, but that's yes.
What is the comment?
Yes, the comment.
The comment is from Ignorance to Wisdom. Not to replace one bad form of government with another, says the anarchist. LOL. I managed this before work. Yay. Yeah, well, you know.
That's oh yeah.
I admire you choosing to read that comment out.
I am like, hey, challenge me, you know. Yeah.
I mean, we had a recent episode about anarchism, and
how did I miss that? I gotta check that out.
Yeah,
that was a good one. Oh my god, that was such a good episode.
It was like our second highest rated of the season. Like, it was really good turnout for that one. But one could almost argue that there's some form of government even in anarchism.
I think this actually also ties into that thing you keep scribbling on the walls, that power is real.
Well, it kind of does.
It does, actually.
You know, Casey, you're sort of right. Wait a minute. What were you saying there?
Well, I said there's some form of government. Like,
yeah, because
even between two people, you have some kind of governance.
No, you do, and government's fine. Like, and there's a lot of anarchists that are like, oh, hierarchies are bad and stuff, and it's like, oh, that's the root of all evil. Like, no, hierarchies do form and exist. They exist in friendships and relationships. They exist in commerce. Like, they exist everywhere. Like, it's not a bad thing unless it becomes everything to you. That's where it's bad.
Well, like there's the sort of hot topic or like 90s punk rock anarchist that is like, just bring down everything, everyone, let alone, and they don't, which doesn't even usually acknowledge it, but they are essentially describing anarcho-capitalism at that point, where it's just individual agreements between like individuals that becomes like absolute law. And that's, as much as a lot of them would hate to hear it, that's sort of the anarchism spray painted on with an A, like on your chest. But then there's the 19th century philosophy of anarchism, which is not at all to do with there actually not being any sort of government bodies. It's entirely about like flattening the hierarchy pyramid to extend wider and not be as far between the bottom and the top.
Huh.
Well, and you know,
I could get on board with that.
And there are varying levels of that, like across different philosophers.
Oh yeah, well, and anarchism, like polyamory, is varied. Like, there are a lot of different flavors that people ascribe to.
You consider getting like sponsored by Tinder?
But you know, like, I feel very resistant to labeling myself as an anarchist, even though I am. You know, on paper I am, but you know, there's this kind of like, oh, you have to be this way or that way. As an anarchist, you don't have to be any way. You just be yourself and let the chips fall where they may, right? Like, isn't that what it's all about? Like the best ideas come forward. That should be the way it happens. So I've become in recent years very resistant to labels because I feel like labels.
Do you think there's like a political entropy where we just move towards disorder?
No, I think no. Honestly, this is one of the things that gives me a lot of faith about anarchism is like humans left to their own devices naturally figure things out. Like they create systems to solve problems, whatever problems might exist. And to put another layer on the political layer, this is where why I am an anarchist is to put another political layer over the top of that just complicates things. And it's like they don't know any better than any of us. Like they're as clueless as anybody else. And yet somehow they're put up on a pedestal like, oh, you should like follow this person or cast a vote for that person, check a checkbox and shit. Like, why? Who are they? Like, I don't know this asshole, you know, like,
that one's sort of attempting to apply a, like, as we do with our attempts at like direct and then Republican democracy, Republican as in like, you know, a republic, a representative republic.
Oh yeah, I know.
Yeah. It's like just taking an idea that is sort of intended to be ideal at a small scale and then trying to expand it to a really big scale, which is, it has a weird relationship with anarchism as being both like the opposite of its point and also sort of necessary for governing a very large territory. But yeah, once you get to a really large territory, like who the fuck is this senator? But if you paid attention, you could absolutely know who your city councilman was.
Well,
and your state representative.
I've made the argument that government has like a geographical reach to it. Like, there's only so far you can really like make an actual impact. You know, it's going to be like
presumably technology could get it to be a wider reach, but it doesn't seem to, because unless people actually see the person in the flesh, they don't usually pay that much attention.
Yeah.
And my question would be like, why do you have to make an impact? Why not just let things work out and, you know, be an advocate for change when change is necessary? Why have a leader? Why have somebody in charge of things? If you have demonstrated an ability to be a fucking god, then maybe you could garner a vote.
Let me ask you, Eric, though,
why not?
What would you rather if you had to choose between one of two things?
Oh no! Oh, you're going to give me this kind of dichotomy, aren't you?
Would you rather have a collective human enlightenment, or would you rather have us finding a new place out in space because we built the technology to get there?
That is not even remotely the direction I expected you to go with that, but I like
that. I feel the same way.
Well, there's a reason I'm asking.
Okay. Please enlighten me. I'm more than willing to.
He wants you to answer the question first, so that then he can reveal the reason he's asking. It's Socratic question asking, like
retrospective illumination. Okay.
Well, if you don't have a preference,
my preference is like towards, well, anarchy, like freedom, liberty, like people doing what they do and figuring things out.
Okay.
Yes,
we will. Collective would not be part of it, so
we would make mistakes along the way. We will definitely make mistakes. That is inevitable, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. But we'll build a better future by exploring those avenues and making mistakes than we would by having some self-proclaimed Jesus leading people.
Okay, I mean, there's no wrong answer. But like, I think that if the idea of anarchism took hold early on in our sociological evolution.
Mhm.
I think at this point in chronological time on this planet, we would not be technologically sophisticated at all.
No,
because
no.
conflict drives a whole lot of technological evolution.
I actually agree with you on that. I think that anarchism is kind of like the next evolutionary step. There you had
use the technology to allow you to.
Well, no, it's societal. There was a time where kings and queens made sense and religion made sense to people a long time ago. Yeah. And now we're into democracy and stuff. And I think the future is anarchism. Like there's a point where we're going to like cast off all of those bullshit old ideas and eventually get to the point where we kind of self-determination.
So where we equate the idea of anarchy and disorder, it's almost like looking into a pond and seeing something diffracted so it looks really far away, but it's actually just right
okay, so you're sort of like creating a dichotomy that doesn't actually exist. Like the idea that it's either anarchy or disorder. Anarchy is not disorder. Like
no, that's actually the argument I was making. I just probably really sucked it.
That's okay. No, it's all right, man.
I was trying to get really esoteric.
Well, okay, so like real quick as a clarifying question, there's like as far as like technology moving us forward, so there's individualist anarchy or like even like objectivist anarchy is in like an extreme of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's collectivist anarchy. And let's imagine that like there are all the problems of trying to figure out what that means. Let's imagine that technology allowed everyone on Earth to essentially like, and they weren't being controlled by the technology, even though obviously there's like the possibility of corruption of it. Technology allowed everyone to vote instantly on decisions that affected the whole human race. And it was essentially technology allowed Earth itself to become a direct democracy in the Athenian style. That would essentially, let me finish the question.
Okay. All right.
That would basically be almost like Athenian style idealized democracy, like the way that they talked about it themselves. But that would mean that the will of the majority of humans that were instantly and honestly like polled would have control over your decision making when it came to anything that, you know, might affect them. Do you prefer that, or do you prefer individuals creating their own destiny without essentially the interference of the majority of humanity getting any say in it?
I prefer the latter. There's merit to the former, but I think the latter yields better results because there's a lot more variety, like people experimenting with different ideas.
It feels like a bigger dichotomy than what I was talking about.
It's a fundamental question between individualism and collectivism, which is not even anarchism can be either collectivist or individualist.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't know. I don't know all the answers, and I think it's important to explore all those ideas. I don't like authoritarianism. People in the ivory tower like telling everybody else what to do because, well, we've all seen how that works out.
That's why there's sort of a fundamental difference between authoritarianism and collectivism, and frequently they can go hand in hand. But much like capitalism and democracy, they are not the same thing.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's why I kind of defer to the idea of like individuals trying individual ideas, testing things. Like we should be experimenting with different ideas.
This is why I don't like to think of
a new frontier. So that is a thing. Go ahead.
Basically, allow experimentation with different forms of government and self-organization all over without like an overall.
Oh yeah, and I don't believe we need government. We don't need anybody like the self-proclaimed experts telling us what to do. Like I think we could probably figure things out we can figure things out for ourselves. And the point being, like, what is the goal? The goal, I think, from most people's perspectives, is like getting along. So, hey, if you're doing your thing over there and I'm doing my thing over here, like, well, good enough. All right. We don't need any leaders or any bosses or anything. Like,
exactly.
Things are working.
That plays into what I was about to say, is that, like, I really hate being looked at on a political spectrum that's two-dimensional.
Yeah.
It's four-dimensional. And I think the fourth dimension is the threads of independence, maybe, like that travel through, like, the entirety of it. Like, everyone wants to be
you're totally right. And that's the thing that, like, brings people who you would not expect to get along together.
Yeah.
Because isn't that what we want? Like, I mean, we're on this fucking ball of dirt floating around in space.
I mean, like, on paper, it sounds like beautiful and stuff, but in practicality, things that you want will impinge on what somebody else doesn't want. Like, well,
that will happen. Yeah.
So, like,
then it's sort of a question of, like, what counts as a valid reason for, like, someone else to be very upset that you've done this, and, like, what counts as, like, less of a valid reason, and what counts as their rights to be able to retaliate if it is a valid reason. And
I'll point people to our recent episode about the injustice system. But
yeah. Well, I would say, like, violating the cardinal rule. You
do unto others. Is that what you mean by the cardinal rule?
Basically, yeah. Essentially, that's it. Like, don't be a dick. Don't be a hypocrite.
What if you are sort of the equivalent of religious, at least, and would like someone else to bring you back to the proper path if you ever strayed, and so you feel like you're obeying the cardinal rule by bringing them to the proper path since they are straying?
That is an interesting idea.
Well, that's not doing harm or not doing harm. That's actively, like, proactively trying to improve something, not avoid hurting them. There's
improving it in your I was interpreting it as do unto others as you would wish to be done unto you. In this case, that rule would include, like, wishing someone else would intervene if you were going down a dark path.
Oh, I see where you're going with that. You're making more of the argument for the platinum rule, like,
right. And so essentially you are now, like, intervening in a way that you believe absolutely is to the benefit of this person, but they don't believe it's to the benefit of them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like,
you just described politics.
Oh man. All right. Well, time to gear up. Yeah. All right.
But so I think generally speaking, the, like, collectivist versus, like, individualist anarchism, it's like the criticism, a lot of criticism is based on both sides, even for, among anarchists. And it's like, if it's collectivist anarchism, then you are under the tyranny of the majority. Like, a lot of them try to essentially make it so that it has to be a consensus, which, can't ever literally mean 100%. So they might make it like 85% or something instead of 51%. So that essentially it really has to be almost everybody if they're going to make you do something. Really sucked during the Spanish Civil War for the anarchist troops that were trying to operate under a system of consensus before deciding strategic maneuvers. Generally speaking,
French Revolution, if I recall.
Yeah, that didn't go well a lot of the time there, and so that one of the reasons that they got around to thinking that killing each other was a better solution.
I like here's the thing, like, I like the idea of a collectivist kind of thing. Like, I mean, people who know me know I'm like a fucking hippie peacenik. Like, I love hippie stuff.
And long walks on the beach. And by the way, I'm poly.
Yeah, I really like that, but I don't think in practice it necessarily works. I mean, maybe it could. I want to hope that it works. And
what's your definition of working?
Well, that was, I was getting into that.
Maximizes happiness, minimizes tragedy and unhappiness.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you feel happy, then it works.
Which is why the government from that one fucking movie with the giant like talking head, chemical bliss, best form of government.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about
Wizard of Oz.
No,
I thought you were talking about Zardos.
That is pretty much what I'm talking about.
Great movie, by the way, if you want to see.
Oh yeah, well, there was some exchange, like at least in the book, where the judge was even like being completely open with them, being like, "Yeah, this is a chemical bliss society where no one really like gets any freedom, but everyone's really happy. You don't like that? That's fine. We're not going to kill you. You just can't come back."
It does feel a bit like Brave New World, and
no, that's the one I was thinking most of. I think.
Yeah, and it's okay if that works for you. Like if it works for you, you do you. I'm fine with that. Like I just don't want somebody else imposing their own philosophy on me, because I would never do the same to you.
Right, like don't judge the people that decide to stay in the matrix if they're not actively betraying you.
Yeah, exactly.
So
like, live your life. Like
real quick though, like so that was the sort of the like legit criticism of the collectivist idea of it. But then you get to the individualist idea and come to the question of if everyone is essentially deciding for themselves freely with no official channels of organization that are compelling them to all band together over something, then I'm quite charismatic and I managed to get 5 other dudes to come over and say that we all agree that you don't really have a right to the stuff that you have now, including the spot you're standing on, like even to that level. And you should actually probably like, you want to do your own thing. That's fine. Go do it anywhere else. And then we'll be there next week to go keep taking from you. And you want to go get people together to follow you. But let's say that if you're not as charismatic as me, you can't match up to my ability to essentially enforce my will through having been able to convince people.
Yep.
And if you are as charismatic as me, you have essentially put yourself in charge of an organization that just has no checks on it.
Well, one of the problems I have,
it's like the Walking Dead universe.
Well, yeah,
or just a repeat of human civilization up to now.
Yeah.
A problem I have with that is like, why is charisma a factor? Shouldn't it be good ideas?
Like okay, so one,
and why not?
Whether or not something is a good idea, whether or not something is a good idea has a lot to do with charisma. Because
I was about to say, like, convincing someone that something is a good idea matters way more than something actually being a good idea.
That actually speaks more to the core of the problem than I think.
I agree. It's
any of us realize the
absolute core of the problem. That is the primary core of the problem.
Yeah.
That is actually the main thing that collectivist anarchism is attempting to deal with. Is that core of that problem, and then they have their own problems that individualist anarchism is trying to fight.
I give them credit for attempting to solve like a near unsolvable problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is pretty cool. Me being a pragmatist, like I don't think it's solvable, so I'm just gonna go to the next
Powers
level
said,
down.
like you can't expect 100%.
Yeah, no,
85% is a pretty good goal.
Yeah, so you use what is the best, closest possible fit to what you want.
But
and not everybody wants the same thing. I'm a gun-toting kind of fucker. And I want my guns. I want to be free. I want to be able to like have sex with everybody that I want to. I want to trade with anybody for anything.
You can do all these things, dude.
Any currency. No, you can't. No, you can't.
What if we're at that 85% right now? Like, what if it could be way worse? And it could be, right? It could be way fucking worse.
I'm not going to like use a comparative analysis. as a judgment.
You can't. You can't really. I mean, like at the same time, because you can't compare what you can't see, but also because like you can't discount the fact that like this might be as good as humans can do in this in this population, right?
I know, because my fundamental belief is we can do a lot better. We could be
less of us could probably do a lot better,
peaceful.
but the more sociological geography your tangled skein has, the more tangled it becomes. Like
that doesn't mean I should abandon what I believe in. Like my fundamental belief.
That's definitely not the point of the conversation we're having right now. Is not to get you to abandon what you believe in. But if I could try to boil it down real quick, essentially, like it seems to me like you fear the tyranny of the masses more than the power of charisma, and I think I fear the power of charisma more than the tyranny of the masses. Like the overall decision making of everyone.
I completely agree, and like honestly, like I Powers, I don't feel your ideas are like any less valuable or valid than mine. Like you're totally right. You're absolutely right. Like I care about that as much.
Likewise, I just, to answer the comment, I did feel like we had to try to challenge it. Like if we're gonna actually have a conversation about it. But likewise, I don't feel like I know better than you. But I do like being able to try to figure out what the difference in thinking is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my intention is to make things better for Earth, I guess. I mean, it's kind of a hippy dippy sort of thing.
But like I think part of that is like trying to reach out and like show people or to see other perspectives. Like, you know, like get people on board with you, or like get on board with other people.
No, I absolutely agree, but I don't want to be like a ruler over people. I want to explore ideas and test things and find out what works. But like, we may land on this point where like nothing is the right solution for everybody.
There's a great argument to make on the flip side, though. You know, you've got rights and you've got responsibilities. It's like, if you look from outside yourself, would you want somebody else doing something that they think is perfectly valid and akin to their own ability to have happiness and freedom that impinges entirely upon what you consider to have?
Well, and that is a thing that I struggle with, like trying to figure that out. I
think we all acknowledge flaws in both directions as well. So as we discuss the flaws, we know that one isn't just from one of these thought experiments immediately correct.
Right. Like I certainly don't believe everything you do should be in order to minimize hurting someone else.
Yeah.
Nor do I think everything should be entirely like, oh, I only care about protecting myself. Like there's a medium, you know.
Exactly. And to me, I've kind of like gotten to this point where I feel like what makes sense, the most sense, is something where as many people are as happy as possible, and nobody's telling anybody else what to do. It doesn't matter whatever your political or religious beliefs are. You shouldn't tell anybody else what to do. Live and let live. And let's try and let's collect data and try to figure out what works. And you know, it may turn out at the end of the day that nothing works for everybody. There may not be one size fits all kind of solution for everybody.
I would put my money on that being
yes. Yeah. Well, in my experience, you're absolutely 100% correct.
Also, like in fiction, a lot of times there's like a fight that is between the absolute individualist, who is all about like people aren't cut from the same cloth. I'm going to fight for everyone's right to determine their own destiny with no interference. and another person who is trying to enforce stability onto the populace. And usually, you know, they have a fundamental flaw of being like very arrogant or very greedy, but their overall goal is that it's a society that follows rules. And it's like being in the middle of those two is not the same thing as being a centrist in US politics between Democrats and Republicans. Like, it's a fundamentally different concept.
Well, and it does kind of bug me that in the US, those are the big choices that are laid out to us. Like, it's kind of annoying because it's like, they're all assholes.
One of the things I remember, one of the few things I remember from high school is in English class, we read a few dystopian novels, and they're all presented from one perspective as a utopia.
Mm-hmm.
And you like see how it devolves into a dystopia pretty much from any like feasible stance you could view it from.
Yeah.
You know, and that instilled in me very early on in life this idea that like you'll never please everybody.
No, you won't. And it's very valuable to have these kind of fictional accounts and explorations and things, but they don't
like the Bible.
Represent reality. Yeah, like the Bible. Yeah, they don't represent reality. Like, it's an interesting thought experiment, like Powers had said earlier.
Right.
We don't know the right way to do things, and there may not be one right way to do things. And that's why I think people should be free to experiment and try their own way.
What was that quote? I think it might have been Winston. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Winston Churchill that was just saying, like, democracy is the worst political system that we've ever invented, except everything else we've tried.
I love Winston Churchill, like that guy. Oh, baller. Oh yeah,
pretty witty.
Mm-hmm. Oh man,
I thought I had a witty statement until I heard that one, and now I've forgotten my witty statement.
Well, I think something that like bugs me is this idea that there are people who know better than any of us, and they're going to just decide like what we all have to do. And the fact is, we don't have to do what they want us to do.
No, we don't actually live in a technocracy. Right now.
Exactly. But like, we don't really have to do it.
It is very apparent by some of the decisions we make. But
and we act on faith. Like, faith is the only thing holding all of that together. And maybe, I feel like things are evolutionary and incremental. Like, we're trying ideas. The US is an experiment, and there's a lot of people that are like, oh, America, fuck yeah. Like, it's an experiment. It's very much an experiment. And we should view it as such, and take away what we can, and try new ideas. Like, do you really think like 200 years ago, like everybody had all the answers? There's this kind of appeal to tradition sort of fallacy bullshit that's happening there. Like,
like founder worship, even though the founders put in a system for amending the Constitution and expected it to be used constantly.
Yeah, no, they were not idiots. They were smart people, but they didn't have all the answers. And the answers,
they were smart because they knew they didn't have all the answers.
Yeah, well, and the answers that made sense back then don't make sense now. Like the planet, the globe, like, and we should really be thinking, oh God, I wish people looked at the planet as a whole and not in terms of borders and their own country and their own political stuff. Like, we're a planet, the blue marble. Like, we are a tiny dust ball,
tiny little ball
in...
of blue hurtling through the endless.
Yeah. Like, we should see it as that and try to make it the best that we can. Like, you know, and there may not be one answer. If anybody thinks there's one answer, well, that's bullshit. If you know humans,
this is like hypothetical and philosophical, but imagine the exponential curve of technological evolution not too far in the future leads us to a point where we are kind of a cerebral collective. How do you think we would make decisions as that collective?
Asimov is your favorite then, right?
I was thinking more Borg, but you know.
Can we not become
dystopia, utopia?
Can we not become the Borg, please? Although I have to, like, I do like the concept of the Borg. Like, it's an interesting.
Is this going to be a poly-orgy thing, or?
Oh, why does it always devolve into sex?
Why do you always steal my thunder before I say it?
But you know, I like that, and you know, this is one of the things, like this whole kind of like, because I honestly believe anarchism is sort of like the next evolutionary step. And yes, there are divergent thoughts. There's the collectivist and the I guess laissez-faire version.
Usually it would probably be called like collectivist and objectivist, but objectivist is so poisoned by Ayn Rand. Instead we politely say
Rand,
individualist, not meaning what she means.
Now, I do. I've read some Ayn Rand. I get what she was going for there. You know, made sense. Well, again, it's
much more fair to say individualist than objectivist, because Ayn Rand is such a jerk.
But hey, let's be fair. Like, it was a different time. It was a long time ago. Like, as I see things are kind of incremental. Like, we learn things, we share ideas, and things change. Like,
it's okay. Not fair to judge the past through the lens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there's some merit to that, sure.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sort of judging Ayn Rand by the thinking of her time, but yes, I definitely agree with that overall principle. But also, okay. I am starting to run out of time. We should probably start closing up, or if you wanted a little bit more about Taiwan and China, I can rapid fire that as far as what's going on now.
Yeah,
although it feels like it's like a whole different universe from that long. And I do think productive conversation we had about
it definitely was. Now, we've been at this for like 2 hours. So
yeah. Well, real quick, I was going to say, Eric, you've likened politics to religion, and the trend in religion is towards atheism right now. So it would logically follow that apolitical thinking would start to be the trend too.
Yeah, like, well, anarchism is actually gaining traction as atheism is gaining traction, even in religion. Like, there are religious people who are like, oh yeah,
I'm more spiritual because organized religion sucks.
Yeah, but anarchist spirituality versus just actually like total anti-theism.
Yep.
Yeah. And I can also, like, when you talk about like anarchism being the next step in the evolution of politics, I sort of think of it being on like the next century's step of politics rather than what's coming soon, where it seems like a lot of authoritarianism in our current world is returning. But overall, like the next century of technological development, I completely agree. If you consider anarchism just being the sort of flattening of the pyramid and into like smaller groups that are able to make more. And I actually think that sort of bears out, weirdly as it sounds, where so much power is being concentrated in the hands of like these tech companies like Google, Facebook, that gather all this data and have so much immense power because of that. And yet at the same time, the amount of stuff that's accepted in society and the amount of personal ability that you have to do various things is also expanding simultaneously, because essentially the people with overlord status no longer need to care about what you do with your own time when the blinds are closed. And it's this weird like mix of things.
Really,
and which one's popular is pretty obvious.
Huh.
Yeah, it bugs me too, and it's a serious threat. But essentially, this version of concentrated power has also changed society's opinion into a more like egalitarian live and let live thing in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
So hey, utopia, dystopia.
Yeah, exactly.
Very poignant.
Oh man.
Huh.
Oh wow.
It's always a little give and take there.
Exactly.
Huh.
Oh man. Wow.
I didn't think Ukraine Russia discussion would turn into, well, I should know better by now. It always does get pretty deep.
Yeah. But it's connected. Like all these threads sort of like eventually tie into each other.
Well, there was a path we took, but I do think that we're a couple miles from where we started.
And that's okay. Like that. Yeah. Hey, that's what we do.
It's a live stream. It can't be edited down, so there's no hope in trying to keep everything fully on top.
Yeah.
Well, we pretty much never edit anyway, so this. If anyone sticks it out this far, they know by the time we're drunk, we're like in the fifth dimension. And
oh my god, fucking what was it you said about fucking something in the fourth dimension?
Our independence is like the thread, almost like the subspace or
right. I was just about to be like follow me into the Tesseract was just what I was thinking the entire time.
Okay, so I just want to say, when we conceived of this channel, we started marketing before we even were live. And I think, Powers, you might have been the first person I invited to the channel, and somebody on your friends list was like, go down the drain, Powers.
Wait, what?
Yeah, because there was, kitchen sink microscopy, deep sink diving, and somebody was like, go down the drain, Powers.
That's amazing. I'll have to go back and find that.
And you did.
Yeah. This is true. I have absolutely enjoyed every time I've been on here.
It's always like one of my favorite conversations. It's so good. Man, Casey, dude.
Cobra Man.
I've got the Russian hat. Why do you not have a Russian gun, man?
I have a Russian gun. I am so tempted to grab my SKS from the other room, but I'd have to get it.
You have an SKS?
Oh, you're gonna make Eric bust out his Mosina Gaunt now.
Oh, Mosina Gaunts are amazing.
Dude, Casey, I have to say, like, the fact that you pronounced that correctly, like, is so titillating.
It's pronounced moist and nigant.
Oh man,
you just got us demonetized, didn't you?
Oh man. Oh god, man, these hats are great.
I never took it off once except to scratch my head.
Yeah, I was getting like a little bit toasty here.
I wish I knew where mine was. It's even got it doesn't have the hammer and sickle. It's even got like the Maoist star on it and a little like thing coming off of it.
Nice.
Made of cheap plastic because it was a $2 hat from China, but that does still mean it's real Chinese hat.
So Hannah, she went to Russia and brought me back a coat. And it was supposed to be like a Russian coat, right? And I look at the tag and it says "Made in China."
Well, globalism, like that's a thing that like we should actually like briefly touch on that. Like people really get bent out of shape over that.
Oh yeah, you should do a whole episode on globalism and the ways in which it's a dog whistle and the ways in which it's a real thing that does not mean what the dog whistle means.
Oh yeah, no.
And also like fucking
a new world order.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Alex,
a new world order.
Globalists are taking over. Like
a new world order of people that are really trying not to have a lot of personal power and dominating us.
Yeah, like individuals trading stuff. That's good. That's a good thing. Hey, by the way, if you're worried about war, that's how you avoid war. People selling their shit like, Etsy.ru.
Same principle for capitalism as fucking Henry Ford paying his workers well. Like workers that have a lot of money can buy my cars.
Yeah, exactly. Like, well, and Ford invented essentially the 8-hour workday.
Yeah.
So we owe that to Henry Ford.
I will briefly acknowledge what a goddamn fucking anti-Semite piece of shit Ford was, as we're talking about how good like some of his things were for workers in the United States, but other people adopted them.
That is true, but the important thing is to recognize like the good ideas that somebody had, because not everybody has good ideas. Like, yeah, there's going to be some bullshit that comes out of that. So
on which point, by the way, Mussolini did not make the trains run on time. Nobody keeps saying that. It didn't fucking happen.
Oh shit. Okay. Yeah. Oh man. But that's the important thing about like, humans getting together and figuring things out, like solving problems that all of the politicians can't solve. Oh yeah, you've been campaigning for 30 years on the same shit and you haven't fixed it. Oh, remember that whole thing you said, I'm gonna fix like homelessness or whatever, like, okay, have you fixed it? No. Well, we're back to square one.
Right. Well, probably a problem with the system more than a problem with the actual people, because the system is designed to pick people, and they've picked the wrong people. And also, there's like fucking 10 easy things we could do that would actually pretty fundamentally change how elections worked overnight. That wouldn't change the way our democracy works, and I hate that we don't fucking do that. And yeah, that wouldn't fix everything, but it's a step we could take tomorrow.
Well, and I agree. Like, we should be incrementally improving things, like small improvements. Like, yeah, okay, you're not going to be a god that's going to descend on planet Earth and fix everything overnight. That's not going to happen. But at least a few changes. Oh, hey, Casey.
Be like Russia in its negotiations with NATO, and fight for incrementalist changes while cocking your gun.
Exactly.
I do not approve of the Putin administration or Russia's actions in any way. Just putting that out there.
No, I don't either, even though I own an AK. Yeah.
While I was taking a piss, I had a thought based on what you guys were saying.
Okay.
And it's like, does a bad event or philosophy or choice in someone's life make everything else invalid that they thought of? Because you were talking about Ford, right? And like how he's kind of a shitty guy, but like he had a lot of good ideas, right?
Oh, like, yeah. Yes, what you're saying.
Like Kennedy wasn't exactly like a loyal husband or anything. But
no, Kennedy was not the best person in the world, but hey, we went to the fucking moon because of his speech. Like the most epic speech. Like I have watched that speech over and over and over again. I love
not because it is easy, but because it is hard.
Yeah.
Also, you can't pronounce the R in hard if you're being Kennedy. But also, I would like to draw a slight distinction though between Kennedy's infidelity and Ford's anti-Semitism. But yes, overall, I agree.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
But you know, it's a really important point to talk about. Like, you could have an imperfect person who has really good ideas. Well, you know, Nikola Tesla. Like, everybody thinks like, oh, fucking Nikola Tesla. He was a great guy.
That shit crazy.
He was actually like not
pigeon shit crazy. Pigeon shit crazy.
Yeah. Oh, well, nice with the pigeons. But
Did he technically marry one of them?
Yeah, I think so.
Next thing you know, they're gonna want to be marrying pigeons.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, he single-handedly changed the face of planet Earth. Like, who can claim that? Like,
aliens.
Okay. All right. Well, there is that.
Do they even have hands, Casey?
Hmm.
Well,
okay. I think we have slightly devolved into just jokes and memes about this topic.
Yeah. But, you know, actually, that's important. It's like, you know, it's pretty clear, like, we have different views on how things ought to operate and how they should, yet we're fucking joking.
Oh yeah. And we honestly, I think throughout at least this episode, we've generally agreed on vaguely what should be done in this situation, even if we have fundamental differences in how the world should be run.
Yeah.
Like, can I tell a Putin joke real quick?
Oh yeah, sure. Go, Putin joke. Hell yeah. Yeah.
So Vladimir Putin is this is a joke from Russia. Vladimir Putin is having a restless night in the Kremlin, somewhere in the area of 2008, with the first challenges to his reign, and he suddenly wakes up to the ooh, and it's the ghost of Stalin waiting for him. And he says, Stalin, why are you here? Do you have wisdom for me? And Stalin says, as much of a pale imitation as you are, I do. First, you must shoot all the Democrats. Then you must paint the Kremlin blue. Why blue? Asks Putin. And Stalin says, ha, I knew you wouldn't ask me about the first part.
Can we not go to war together? This is one of the things that really annoys me about this particular conflict. I know Russian people. I have Russian friends, and they're the greatest friends that you could ever hope to have. Why would we throw that all away and lob nukes at each other? And
well, one thing the internet's actually been pretty good for, especially in countries like Russia that have never been cut off from the internet, and America, where you may click on the wrong article or not even fucking read it before you share it, but you're exposed to it. Is that the idea that we don't think of the Russian people as to blame for this tension, and the Russian people don't blame the United States citizens as to blame. And part of that is just understanding the nature of governments and power, and part of that is also that the propaganda on both sides is that it's a corrupt elite that is dominating the people below it.
Yeah, well, and we did kind of talk about this with you. Was it? It was shit.
Another episode or another guest?
Past episode. With
Iran and
Iran,
which is that's the one I was on. It's even more significant in Russia than it is in Iran. Like opinion polls there show that, for instance, like a significant majority of Russians, like a very significant majority, are fundamentally opposed to war over this. But at the same time, that almost that same amount of majority is convinced that NATO is the one that is creating this situation for war. And they do actually draw some distinction between the United States and NATO as far as this. Like they are, some of the Russian population is like informed enough, unlike ours in a lot of situations, informed enough to draw a distinction between the needs of NATO and the desires of the United States. Which might just be one thing that is just helpful through having your news constantly pumped in through like a state media service, and then getting your actual news online, is you get to see more directions of what people want you to think, whereas we have to sort of guess who's trying to get us to think something versus who's actually trying to inform us. Sorry, that was just rambling. Point is, the Russian people generally don't blame the American people for it, even less than the Iranian people blame the American people for it. And that seems to be especially vice versa in the case of American people versus Russian citizens. Like Americans seem to think the same thing as far as everyone I've talked to. So there's your hope for peace. It might still happen, but really nobody on the ground in either side wants to be killing the other.
It's funny that we did talk about majority views and stuff like that, and the general consensus of that conversation was that the majority rules everything, but really the majority doesn't want the things that we tend to do.
No, the majority has a sort of like a loose leash on those in power and the minority in power. Mm-hmm. And the better the government system, the tighter that leash is to pull them back. But it doesn't mean that they just decide everything.
Yeah. Damn.
Whoa. Well, shit.
Well, I don't know if we got anybody still hanging with us. Maybe like one person, but that's probably a good point to wrap things up, huh?
I agree, because also if we had people sticking with us, it would just be for your personalities, because we have so gone off topic if they were trying to come for the topic, and then had a really good discussion about something they didn't come here for, but that people who would come here for that didn't know was happening. So you would have followed us through quite a roller coaster today. They'll have to find it in the recording.
That's all of our episodes, really, honestly.
Yeah. Well, and Casey and I, like, Russian hats. Okay.
All right. Yeah, I do. That is probably a good place to wrap up, because I need to use the bathroom again and then probably start to get ready to go to bed.
Yeah, me too. I got to work on the weekend, and I haven't had a day off in a while. That's all right.
Let me know if you guys end up doing an episode with that Ukrainian friend of yours to get an insider perspective. I'd love to watch it.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Hell yeah.
Or you could be on with him if you want.
Sure. Yeah, sounds great to me.
I love having you on, because your perspective is so like informed, but also nuanced and artistic in its delivery. So it's
much appreciated. But yeah, I get what you mean. Just being like, oh yeah, I'm ready to roll with whatever you guys want to start talking about.
I love you, man.
Likewise. No, yeah, seriously, I absolutely enjoy every time I'm on here.
Right on. Well, I'm sure we'll have you back in short time, and we thank our one remaining viewer. for sticking it out with us.
Salutations.
Peace out.
Special Tinder privileges from Eric.
Oh man.